I'm Wario. I'm gonna get the ring.
22. WarioWare Snapped. Well, this sure is a video game alright. WarioWare Snapped barely even counts as a game. It's really just a tech demo that barely works at all. There's only 20 micro games, and once you've played them all, there's no reason to play them again. Instead of using the buttons or the touchscreen for controls, you use the camera. Yeah, Nintendo went full on iToy mode, and the results are f***ing awful. For whatever reason, I could not for the life of me get the camera to read my face and hands. It kept saying I needed a sharp contrast between me and the background. So I put up my green screen, and that still wasn't distinct enough. I kept getting this countdown that was trying to match my lighting, but it would just cancel out over and over again. So after like 5 minutes, I finally said screw this and decided to put my hoodie on the green screen for a black background. But as I did this, the camera decided to work now and took a picture of my ass. Good job, Wario, you creep. But anyway, my hoodie strategy actually worked, and after all of that, the game finally started running. Well, kind of. I still had to put my hand over my face so enough of the image was getting captured, but whatever, it did the job. The micro games are pretty amusing for what it's worth, and the end shows either video or images of the games you played. But for how much trouble it took to just run the games, it wasn't worth it at all. Now I should mention that I played this on a new Nintendo 2DS XL and not an actual DSi, so maybe that was the problem? But here's my question. Why would you allow this game to be compatible if the camera functionality barely works? 21. Wario Master of Disguise. You all remember that 2002 Master of Disguise movie? Man, I loved that as a kid. I actually rewatched it last year, and holy shit, it's aged horribly. But anyway, this is the only Wario game we get on the DS that's a platformer, and it does so with a lot of touchscreen controls. This one decision completely destroyed this game. To start, you jump by pushing up and only up. Yeah, within 5 minutes of learning that, I already knew this game was going to be a mess. To open treasure chest, you have to play a touchscreen minigame. That might not sound too bad at first glance, until you realize there's only 8 minigames, and that all of them are easy, and you'll play the same ones for the next 10 hours, and there's like a bajillion chests to open. What the f*** happened here? I get that WarioWare exists, so including minigames makes sense, but this destroys the pacing of the entire game. These minigames are just boring, and it takes forever to make any sort of progress. And there's so much dialogue. Like, seriously, I don't care about this story. And the music sounds like it comes from an educational game. It's that bad. Or, to be more fair, it's not like ear grating or anything, but it's way too relaxed and generic for what should be an exciting game about getting rich. Wario's disguises, at the very least, look cool, and you turn into them by drawing certain shapes on the touchscreen. I really don't like this mechanic, because you have to constantly change disguises, which takes a while to draw instead of just swapping with another button. And half the disguises are super lame. Arty Wario lets you draw boxes, but you can't move? Why the hell can't I move? And Captain Wario gives you a floaty for the water. Wow. Oh, but don't worry, Sparky Wario lights up a room! Slightly more. Look, I really like the design of the disguises, but in terms of its practicality, it's a snooze fest. This game might have been okay if there were way more mini-games and all the touchscreen controls were mapped to a button, but it's on the DS, so of course the touchscreen was forced in. 20. WarioWare D.I.Y. Showcase. I completely forgot this existed until playing through D.I.Y. on the DS, but this is basically a way to play your own creations on the big screen. Since the Wi-Fi doesn't work anymore on the Wii, all you can really do is upload your own microgames locally, but the fact that that's even possible is so cool. Plus, there's a handful of pre-made microgames you can try. There's really not much else to say, considering this is almost like an expansion to the DS version. 19. WarioWare D.I.Y. I shouldn't be that surprised that you can make your own micro games. Nintendo has given us Mario Paint, Game Builder Garage, Super Mario Maker. They love doing stuff like this. WarioWare D.I.Y. is for beginners that are looking to get into game dev as a career. There are some pre-made games if you really want to play them, but they're pretty bare bones as they only use the tools that are available to those creating these games. Plus, you can only tap the screen as an action. There is no sliding, dragging, or even the microphone. I get why they did that since it would make game dev more complicated, but it makes the default microgames a lot weaker. So this isn't for those that just want to play stuff, especially since you can no longer share or download games online. However, if you've always dreamed of making your own microgames, you will love WarioWare D.I.Y. It's surprisingly deep and not all that hard to use. I made this really shitty microgame myself in about 30 minutes. It's about Sans Undertale, and you win by just tapping him. And he also blinks his funny blue eye because, yeah, you can even animate your objects. And I'll leave it admit and say that I'm kind of proud of my Megalovania arrangement. Even making music is really deep, with tons of instruments to pick from, and you can work with several layers. It's really difficult to place this game in a ranked video though, because a lot of what made it so great can't be utilized anymore. Your enjoyment is really going to come down to how creative you are, and how much time you're willing to commit to making awesome microgames. 18. Wario's Woods, NES. As someone that's played a lot of Tetris and Pokemon Puzzle League over the years, I tend to pick up on puzzle games pretty easily. Wario's Woods, however, is a completely different beast. I think it's really charming how you'll physically walk from level to level. That's not something you see in puzzle games every day. And the music is pretty catchy. And as I'm sure you know, this was the last first-party game to be released on the NES. As for the game itself, well, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. You'll run along the stage as Toad and have to blow up these monsters with bombs. This only works if you have a couple bombs colliding with these monsters, which sounds simple enough, right? Well, if only. Let's keep in mind that you can literally only move stuff with Toad. Toad can pick up a couple things, which is nice, but if you're trying to rearrange a pile of stuff, you just fall back to the side you were on, making it hard to move things to where you want them to go. And plus, if you take too long to clear the level, Wario comes in and dumps extra crap all over the screen. So there's definitely a learning curve to this one, which is fine, but that also makes it a lot harder to get into a puzzle game like this. And there's no battling computers. You can only do 2-player mode, and there's also a timed race. So all in all, it's a decent puzzle game if you're okay with taking time to learn its ropes. 17. Wario's Woods, SNES. It's basically the same game, but obviously it looks a lot nicer being on the SNES. There's also a new mode where you can face off against computers that will absolutely wreck you. Again, I'm not very good at this game, but even on easy I couldn't get past the first level. So maybe I'm just doing something wrong, but yeah, you might as well play this version since it's got more perks. 16. Wario Blast featuring Bomberman. That is a title I never thought I'd say. This is a Game Boy game that is quite literally just Bomberman. The only characters you can play as are Wario and Bomberman himself, and if you've played this series before, then you know what you're getting yourself into. You go around a map blowing up trash, trying to hit your opponents to win. The music is extremely catchy, and there's even some boss battles. You'll fight a guy sitting on a teacup, an angry plant, some spider thingy. It's a good amount of variety. I'm pretty awful with Bomberman since I've played very little, but I find it super fascinating that this collaboration exists at all. There's also a password system if you really want to save your progress, and that's all there is to this one. If you really like Bomberman games, then this would probably rank higher for you. 15. Game & Wario. So instead of getting WarioWare on the Wii U, we got this spin-off instead. And it goes for something very different. Gone are the microgames, and instead there's 16 minigames, 4 of those being multiplayer only. That sounds kinda lame considering there's like a billion minigame compilations out there, but these ones supposedly use the gamepad and TV's asynchronous features. But does it really? Well, let's check out all the games since there aren't that many of them. Arrow has us flicking arrows with the gamepad towards the TV to hit targets and enemies. It's pretty fun actually, considering you can also fire stronger shots and blocks, so we're off to a good start. Then there's Shutter. You can take pictures of criminals while aiming your camera with the gamepad, and this one is decent enough, although the movement feels a bit sensitive when zoomed in, which, hey, I guess that makes sense since that happens when zooming in with a real camera. Then we've got Ski. You're skiing by tilting the gamepad. Yeah, that's about it. The camera angle is different on the TV and gamepad, but that doesn't add much to the game itself. Patchwork is just a puzzle game and nothing more. Kung Fu requires us to jump around to find scrolls and get to the end. The perspectives are again different on the TV and gamepad, and this one is done a bit better since there's hidden collectibles that you can only see with your gamepad. Gamer is by far the best one of the bunch. You have to play a round of actual WarioWare while trying to avoid getting caught by your mom. As kids, I think we all had nights where we pretended to be asleep but were secretly playing our Game Boy or DS under the covers, so it's a pretty relatable game. Since we're forced to constantly check the gamepad and TV, it's one of the best ideas I've seen come from the Wii U, period. Following that, though, is design, which is stupid. Just try to draw lines or circles the right size and pray you were accurate. Then there's Ashley. You're just flying around collecting dots. Again, I don't see how the gamepad enhances a game like this. Then we've got Taxi. You're shooting UFOs while driving around, and yet again, this could have been done entirely with one screen. Pirates is a rhythm game where you block shots from ships grips, and it's actually super fun. Moving the screen to the beat feels really good, so they've got a winner here. Outside of that though, there's some multiplayer games as well as bowling and Pyoro. So all in all, there's like 3 decent minigames and the rest are just boring. They could have easily put Arrows, Gamer, and Pirates in a proper Wii U WarioWare title as side games, but instead they sold it as the main package. 14. WarioWare Inc. Mega Microgames. Yep, the box really has a $sign replacing the S. I guess because Wario likes money. This is the very first WarioWare game. It began the whole idea of playing a bunch of microgames in a swift manner as the actual game. This was another one of those games I saw trailers of online as a kid, but never had the means to actually try it until now. And honestly, it hasn't aged super well. I think it actually comes down to the hardware limitations. I've really been spoiled by how jumpy and poppy the newer games are. The single-player mode is extremely bare bones. You can beat the entire thing in under an hour, which is short even for a WarioWare game. A lot of the microgames are also really confusing, even after playing them multiple times. That is, of course, part of the fun, which is figuring out what the hell to do in a span of 2 seconds, but some of these are just really out there and aren't explained well. I wouldn't call Mega Microgames a bad game by any means, but it kinda reminds me of Mega Man 1. Very rough around the edges, but built a solid framework for the sequels that come after it. 13. WarioWare Inc. Mega Party Games. If you played Mega Microgames, you've basically played Mega Party Games. All the microgames are ported over in the single-player mode, with the only addition being multiplayer. In fact, it actually removes some of the unlockable minigames and cutscenes, which doesn't make much sense considering the GameCube could run all that. But is the multiplayer cracked? Well, it's alright, I guess. It's nothing mind-blowing, but there are a few modes that I had some fun with. Out of My Way is a neat one where one person plays microgames and the other distracts them with the character they picked. This strangely is foreshadowing to WarioWare Get It Together, and I'm kind of wondering if this mode inspired that entire game. Balloon Bang was fun too. One player blows up a balloon while the other plays microgames. You keep switching until someone makes the balloon pop. Power Outage was probably my all-time favorite, where you'll team up with one person playing and the other holding a flashlight trying to help you see what you're doing. So I guess the extra multiplayer makes this better than Mega Microgames, but not by much. I do have to give a shout out to the staff roll, as it's a really fun space shooter where you'll try to shoot all the blocks to reveal the first letter of the developers' names. It's not often we see games try to make the credits fun, so it's always a treat when that happens. 12. Wario Land Super Mario Land 3. Did anyone even play this one? I remember Wario Land 2 and 3 being all the rave back in the day, but maybe that's just me. This being Wario's first fully fledged game, they introduced a lot to this character that has stuck with them even to this day. The dash attack, powering up by eating garlic, picking up enemies after stepping on them, using coins to open doors. All these different elements really make this game stand out amongst Mario's usual platforming, and for the better. It might be on the Game Boy and it's kind of hard to look at nowadays, but it's still very charming. Wario's even got a few power-ups. Dragon Wario breathes fire through the dragon's nostrils, and Jet Wario can soar through the air briefly. I also love how small Wario just looks like some random middle-aged dude with a receding hairline. The older we get, the more relatable Wario becomes to us all. The general gameplay is pretty solid, and the locations are extremely varied. My favorite being the train and forest levels. They really did a good job with the sprites to make these places distinguishable. And at the end, your total coin count gives Wario a house. Or if you max out your coins, Wario owns a frickin' planet. So if you like Super Mario Land, you'll like this game too, since it's a bit more in-depth than a typical Mario game. 11. WarioWare Get It Together. I'm genuinely shocked that the main gimmick doesn't involve the Joy-Con's motion controls, but instead takes an entirely different approach. You still rapid-fire through microgames, but you do so by controlling one of the WarioWare characters. Each one has different abilities, like jumping. Jumping. There's also shooting ninja stars or firing discs out of your hair. It may sound like a fun idea, but in practice, this only kinda works. The microgames all have to be built around each character's different traits, which naturally makes some microgames perfect for some characters or near impossible for others. Now, I appreciate Nintendo trying to freshen things up, but because every character doesn't work fluidly with every microgame, there's moments where playing feels like a chore or downright unplayable. When the microgame and character combo works well, Get It Together is at its best, but that's only with the right combination. And there's a couple other small things I didn't really care for either. The music is decent at best, some of it's catchy and energetic, but there's a lot of pieces that are forgettable. But how about that voice acting? WarioWare Gold had full-on voice acting 3 years before, and this game doesn't. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. Everyone will say either their name or the first word in a sentence, and that's about all we get. I kind of understand the reasoning for this because some people don't want to hear voice acting when reading the text, but why not do it anyway and give us the option to turn it off? Now, I know I've done a lot of shitting on this poor game, but even so, it's still pretty solid. The presentation's fantastic, WarioWare has never looked better, and the story mode is paced extremely well. The final boss is also really neat since you have to use every character's abilities to defeat him, despite it being super easy. The extra content is decent as well. You can spend your coins to upgrade the crew and even paint them different colors. I decided to make Wario Gold because there's a WarioWare Gold game? I don't know. There's also this online Wario Cup where you compete for a high score, but you can't actually play online. And I haven't even mentioned that there's several multiplayer modes that let you play the microgames locally in a ton of creative ways. So yeah, overall, this is a fine enough WarioWare game and you'll have fun with it. But most of the other offerings are more memorable and enjoyable. The last thing I have to mention though is the insane meta of this one microgame. We are playing WarioWare Get It Together inside of Wario's video game, and the microgame is WarioWare Twisted, which is inside of a Game Boy Advance. That is some wild shit right there. 10. WarioWare Twisted. After waiting like 4 years, I got the Analog Pocket and was excited to try WarioWare Twisted on a screen that I could actually see clearly. And not only does it works well. After playing Yoshi Topsy Turvy and Kirby's Tilt and Tumble last year, I didn't have high hopes for the controls. But honestly, the tilting is pinpoint accurate, which makes the microgames extremely immersive. There's even a rumble motor, and it kind of reminds me of HD Rumble. When you're turning, it's not just an abrupt shake like, with the N64's Rumble Pack. No, this is much more subtle and mimics the impacts of what's happening in each microgame. My only complaint with this is that the menu calibration can be a little janky. If you turn the menu too much to one side, the middle point on your screen will get a little off, but you can adjust this by holding R, which grabs the menu until you let go. And this is never a problem with the actual microgames. Like with the other Game Boy Advance titles, Twisted comes with a bunch of fun cutscenes. The pacing is great too. You don't sit on completed microgames for nearly as long, which is something that was only a problem with Mega Microgames. I honestly can't believe how much fun WarioWare Twisted is. The only downside is there isn't anything to do outside of the microgames. You can collect souvenirs and there's a few small games to try, but nothing beyond that. 9. Virtual Boy Wario Land. Every time I hear people talk about this game, they all say it's the only good Virtual Boy game. But is it actually any good? Because I've never seen anyone talk about it in any sort of detail, and I've never played it fully until now. Wario Land on the Virtual Boy is a visually stunning game. The sprite detailing is really phenomenal. I mean, just look at how nice it looks in just red and black. Imagine if this was in full color. It would be the most stunning retro Wario game. And it controls really great too. Much better than the Game Boy and Game Boy Color titles. There's a much better sense of speed, and you can feel the impact of Wario's dash attack, especially when it's upgraded to Bull Wario. There's a couple new power-ups as well. We've got Eagle Wario, where you can fly for a bit, and King Dragon Wario, which enhances his flying even more. One of the main gimmicks is jumping from the foreground and background, because this was a 3D handheld after all. And while it's not all that impressive today, it was probably really cool when BB Wario initially came out. There's 4 different bosses, and they're all pretty fun to fight. And can we just take a gander at Demon Head? Just look at that nose. I mean, it's gotta suck trying to eat around that thing. It is such a crime that we've never gotten a remake, or even just a basic port. Why wasn't this added to the 3DS's Virtual Console library? This could not have been a more obvious pick, but Nintendo be doing Nintendo things, of course. So if you've got other means to play this game that isn't on the actual hardware, it's worth checking out. 8. WarioWare Smooth Moves. This is probably the most well-known WarioWare game ever, and for good reason. WarioWare paired with the Wii Remote was voted 2006 Cutest Couple of the Year, because it's incredible how compatible these two things are. The remote is used in a wide variety of ways. I'm sure most people remember the elephant, the waiter, or the samurai. Even though you technically don't have to play most of these microgames in the so-called forms, it's way more fun to commit and just go wild. When the new forms are introduced, we get this super sultry voice explaining how it works.
The sketch artist. Hold the form baton as you would a pencil during a pop quiz, delicately but defiantly. Mastery of this move can change a pop quizzee into a pop quizzer.
Whoever narrated these scenes needs a damn raise. If you're still out there watching this, please hit me up. I would love to work with you. Seeing as this is on Wii, the cutscenes are way more lively and animated compared to the DS and Game Boy, and it really adds a lot to the story mode. It's still the same formula, but you're constantly switching between different forms. There's a few microgames here and there where the controls don't seem to work perfectly, but it happens so little that it's not really an issue. And also, the level select music is f***ing amazing. I don't know why it's so damn catchy. I genuinely can't get enough of it. And you can't forget about the boss game where you dance around and slap your ass. This just might be the magnum opus of gaming. There's also a multiplayer mode, which is alright, but it is a little clunky having to take turns playing the microgames. The side games are also pretty solid all around. So yeah, there's a reason most people remember Smooth Moves more than any other WarioWare game. 7. WarioWare Touched. By far the most nostalgic Wario game for me. This was one of the many DS games I owned as a kid, and I played the hell out of it. And since this is on the DS, you'll of course use the touchscreen and microphone for all the microgames. You may think that the games themselves would all feel the same because you can't do that much with a touchscreen, but like with Smooth Moves, they used very specific motions and made dozens of games with that. Tapping, dragging, spinning, slicing, all of these are in their own categories for each character. I also love how the intro shows Wario trying to twist his DS to get it to work, referencing WarioWare Twisted. It's so refreshing to see a Nintendo series be so willing to break the fourth wall. And just about all the microgames are a blast. I even have this distinct memory with one in particular when I was like 12 years old. I was obsessed with the toilet paper microgame, and one day I spent like 30 minutes sitting in my mom's computer chair spinning in circles going for the highest score possible. And my god, the music. There are so many tunes that are just so infectious and will easily get stuck in your head for hours. If there's anything bad to say about WarioWare Touched, I guess the cutscenes in the story mode kind of drag on a bit, but that's not much of an issue at all. This is a very pick-up-and-play title where you're supposed to play all the characters multiple times to unlock all the microgames. And just look at them walking around on the menu. It kind of reminds me of Mario Hoops 3-on-3 where the crew is cute little pixels just waiting to get tapped by you. Also, how am I just noticing Mr. Game & Watch ripping a fat one? I don't know why he's here at all, but I just wanted to point that out. Now, as a downside, I guess the microphone games feel a little out of place, but I appreciate that they went out of the way to make some anyway. And like most WarioWare titles, there's a bunch of side games you can play, but the lineup this time is really weak. They kind of remind me of those bizarre Mario Party Advanced gadgets, where there's a lot of stuff to try, but nothing with substance. I mean, look at what's included. A calculator, this mini clacker, a snowball that turns into a snowman but you can destroy it in one tap, an iguana that changes color. Okay, but I gotta geek out about 9V. I mean, the dude has a freaking Pokemon Mini in his Nintendo collection. I thought I was the only one with that. This is one of the best WarioWare games out there, but it can still be topped. 6. WarioWare Gold. Instead of getting WarioWare on the Wii U, which would have been incredible, like, why didn't you do this, Nintendo? I still can't believe it. Instead, we got a compilation of older microgames on the 3DS, which sounds almost impossible to do because every WarioWare game controls differently, but they actually managed to rework the older games really well. But first things first, the cutscenes have voice acting. Yes, Nintendo discovered what voice acting is for about 5 seconds, and then they went back to text boxes. But the voice actors did a phenomenal job. For some reason, I'm really digging Jimmy T's the most.
Hey, Jimmy always knows.
Can we get a pic?
I thought you would never ask.
His voice just meshes with the characters so well, and because of this extra VA, the story mode is paced a lot better. The microgames this time around are split into groups that use the buttons, tilt the 3DS, and touch the screen. It's the best way they could have gone about this, especially since there's 316 microgames, which is still the most of any WarioWare game. And they aren't even all ported from older titles. There's quite a few new microgames too. The extra games are also a lot better than normal, which is nice, like Sneaky Gamer, which is an amazing port of Gamer from Game & Wario. It doesn't feel quite as immersive as being forced to look back and forth from your gamepad to the TV, but it's still a lot of fun. Wario Interrupted is incredibly cool since Wario distracts you while you try to play the microgames. And the Cat and Anna one is really fast as you'll go back and forth between playing games on the top and bottom screen. While these are just different ways of playing the same microgames, it's done in much more distinct ways than the older titles attempted. The arcade stuff is also more interesting. There's a bunch of fun mini games to try out, and even an option to dub the cutscenes. I dubbed Ash's intro just for fun.
Something inside him always wants more.
Wow.
Now, when I played this a few years ago, I was really confused about all these alarm clocks, only to recently discover how ingenious they are. When the alarm goes off, the 3DS will ring until you play a few microgames. While it's an amazing idea for an alarm clock, I don't want the 3DS's bright-ass screen in my eyes since they would probably bleed. WarioWare Gold deserves its title. It picks some of the best microgames from the series thus far and polishes the side content so well that you'll actually want to take the time to unlock everything. 5. Wario Land 3. Right from the get-go, Wario dies. Okay, not actually. He finds this music box and then gets sucked into it. To escape, he's got to find 5 other music boxes. While this controls very similarly to Wario Land 2, the gameplay structure is very different. To start, you don't have a lot of your powers and abilities. You're forced to unlock them as you go. And I mean most of your abilities. Wario can't even pick enemies up at the beginning, which seems like the world's dumbest thing to forget, but this is like a Metroidvania, so I get the reasoning behind it. This game has a very open structure to it once you get your abilities back. You'll have to play through the levels a few times over to find different chests and treasures. I don't usually care much for games that force me to replay levels like this, but I think this structure works well for Wario Land 3. Each level is bite-sized, so finding new areas isn't that difficult or obtrusive to do. In fact, this is a fairly easy game in general. The new reactions that Wario can transform into are pretty interesting too. We got Yarn Ball Wario, which forces him to roll around. There's Invisible Wario, where he'll pass through certain walls, and Zombie Wario can just fall through thin platforms. The coins are now used to play this golf minigame, where Wario's club is just his dash attack. Shockingly, this minigame is a blast to play and controls great, which is the last thing I thought I'd be saying about 2D golf. The only gripes I have is that some of the enemies can be a bit annoying sometimes. Getting launched back or forced to climb over and over because you didn't avoid their attack is a pain, but those issues are few and far between. It can also be a bit hard to tell what certain objects are because this is on Game Boy Color, but that's a limitation that couldn't be fixed back then. The puzzles are just the right difficulty to where it doesn't slow the game down too much, yet it requires you to actually use your noggin. Now that I've finally played all the Wario Land games, I am stunned that we've never gotten remakes. Like, seriously, these games should be just as cherished as the classic Mario games are. I mean, there's no live count for crying out loud. Talk about being ahead of its time. 4. Wario Land 2, and this one has Roman numerals, while the others are just normal numbers. I don't know why, you can ask Nintendo if you want though. This was a fairly big departure from the first Wario Land, and it was absolutely for the better. You can still run around as Wario, collecting money and looking for the exit, but now there's multiple endings. After beating the game once, you get a map to see which chapters and treasures you missed, so it's extremely replayable. Wario Land 2 is a lot like Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, although kind of better if I'm being honest. I actually wanted to go out of my way to find all the different endings and treasure. Exploring is really fun to tackle because the levels are big enough to the point that it's not overwhelming, but also small enough that you can remember what each place looks like. The gameplay loop is much smoother than the first game too. Wario runs around a bit faster, and turning feels more responsive. There's also a lot more conditions that Wario can use. These are used in an incredibly ingenious way. Most power-ups in games only give the player an advantage, which is what you'd expect, but in this series, they can also be used against you. Hot Wario, as an example, has 2 different forms. The first one has Wario running around while being burned alive, and then he turns into literal flames which can be used to destroy specific blocks. Now, you can only jump in the first form, so you have to figure out where Wario needs to be to access new areas while he's on fire. Also, can I just point out, Wario is on fire and he just shakes it off like nothing happened. Wario's conditions are used in this way throughout the whole game, so you have to battle your way through and figure out how to properly use these abilities. I owned this game as a kid and didn't really like it as I got confused on what to do, but as an adult, this game is quite enjoyable. Even the music is pretty catchy. It's got this mischievous yet energetic tone to it, and for Game Boy Color, it looks pretty solid. That is, if you're playing the colorized version. For a lot of people, Wario Land 2 and 3 are the best of the bunch, but the limitations of being on the Game Boy hold them back just a little bit compared to what's coming up. 3. Wario Land Shake It, or The Shake Dimensions in Europe. Man, that title's so much better. This is the last proper Wario Land we've gotten so far, and it came out in 2008. But interestingly, it doesn't seem like it came out in 2008, because look at how damn nice this game looks. Everything is hand-drawn and animated beautifully. It's actually insane how much production was put into this. Just look at Wario shaking his ass. Have you ever seen anything more stunning in your life? This reaches Cuphead levels of detail. Just the way that Wario squeezes through pipes or whips his ass out when ducking, the attention to detail alone makes this game worth playing. It's like you're interacting with a cartoon. Wario Land Shake It plays very similarly to Wario Land 4, where you have to find a certain thing at the end of a level and run back to the beginning before time runs out. I like this approach in Wario Land 4, and I think it works well here too. It's pretty straightforward compared to Wario Land 2 and 3, which I prefer. You won't have to go too far out of your way to find hidden treasures and find the secret levels. As for controlling Wario, well, it's mostly fantastic. The only move that doesn't return from Wario Land 4 is the super fast dash attack. That's been set to these blocks that you go through, which is a fine enough alternative. Rolling down hills has been switched to sliding, which is more realistic, but not as fun as just a normal roll. My biggest blunder with the controls, though, is the shaking. To get the money from chests or to smash your fist into the ground, you have to shake the controller. It's responsive and it works, but it's just so unnecessary. It's the same thing with Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii. Like, it's fine and it works, but you shouldn't have to shake the remote to slap the ground. That's just dumb and takes more effort. I should rephrase that this is not like the apocalypse or anything, but I gotta dock the game some points for it. The music's pretty on point though. There's a lot of really catchy tunes, with a handful of them sticking with me after playing. The locations are also really great, and the level design has some fun platforming and works well with Wario's moveset. The coins this time are used to buy the area maps and other items, which means if you really wanted to, you could farm coins and skip to the last world. It's a really interesting approach to let you just buy worlds whenever you want, although I don't see why anyone would want to skip worlds considering how fun the game is to begin with. The last thing to mention is the final boss, because it's the best the entire Wario series has to offer. You have to fight the Shake King, which has 3 different phases. The fight starts in his castle, and you have to throw him off balance so he gets stuck in the wall, then dash into his crotch a bunch of times and throw him into the wall again. The Shake King gets absolutely obliterated, but by the end he starts hurling all these energy balls, lasers, and fireballs at you, and it actually gets a bit difficult. I love how the ending also doesn't have music, but instead a really ominous yet intense instrumental. This game is simply awesome, and it's almost up there with the Mario Galaxy games as one of the best Wii titles. 2. Wario World. This is one of the most mystical GameCube games to me. It's not Wario Land or WarioWare, but just some random Wario 3D platformer. And I've had a physical copy for over a year, just wanting to play the damn thing, but I decided to be patient and waited until this video, and my god, this is a fever dream. This game just screams Wario, and I can't get enough of it. You still run to the end of levels and have to collect various jewels and treasures along the way, but now the combat is more in depth. You'll mostly punch and throw enemies, but the bigger enemies can be spun around like they're Bowser in Mario 64 or pile-driven into the ground. But honestly, Wario's personality is what really carries this entire game. Like all early 3D platformers, Wario is constantly shouting phrases and yells after each jump and attacks. I mean, come on, he's such a goober. It's hard to not love Wario after playing this. Inside each level is a bunch of sub-areas, and some of them give off serious Mario Sunshine vibes. I mean, this is on the GameCube, and everyone loved those levels in Mario Sunshine, so it only makes sense for Wario World to have its own version of them as well. Collecting coins is mainly used to continue playing after getting a game over, which is a really good incentive to fight enemies. A lot of people praise Mario Odyssey for this exact reason, when Wario World did the same thing several years beforehand. The only issue with this is when you fall down a pit. Instead of losing coins, you're thrown into this Pac-Man maze-like area, and you have to find a switch to go back up. It's a cool idea at first, but it gets old and I'd rather just lose 30 coins and warp back up right away. The pause screen is also worth mentioning. Yep, Wario he's just a beautiful singer. But what's really worth mentioning is that when you sit in the pause screen for 50 minutes, Wario apologizes for being annoying. I'm not joking. Like I said, this game is really weird and goofy, and it's been really refreshing to finally play it. It's not perfect though. My main issue is the fact that I can't move the camera very freely. It's usually fixed in one spot, and for some levels you can move it around and occasionally rotate it, but I wish I had a bit more freedom. The music is pretty hit and miss as well. Most of it works well, but there's nothing that'll stick in your mind. And I've heard some people say that Wario World is boring and repetitive, and while I agree that it gets a bit button mashy with all the combat you gotta do, I still found it to be pretty fun the whole way through. The way Wario World does combat is just so much more interesting than most platformers anyway. And there are some wonky bosses, the strangest one being this massive baby angel thing. It looks so uncanny being untextured, but that's what you get with most GameCube games. Wario World is absolutely worth playing. I'm surprised how well it's held up. 1. Wario Land 4. I played this game for about 10 minutes, and with just that amount of time, I knew this was the best Wario game. Holy sh**. Where has Wario Land 4 been my whole life? For starters, this is one of the most fluid and well-paced platformers I have played in years. The controls were pretty good in Wario Land 1 through 3, but 4 has refined things to perfection. Running around is faster, the swimming controls are perfect, you can aim and charge the rocks or enemies you throw, you've got this lunge attack which lets you plow through stronger boulders, you actually have all your abilities from the start. This game doesn't have an open structure like Wario Land 3 does, but honestly, I much prefer that. I think this style of gameplay worked, but I'm a bigger fan of the linear style with some light exploration within the levels themselves. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. Just look at this game. This is one of the most stunning Game Boy Advance titles I've ever seen. The colors and sprite animation are simply exquisite. It's an art style that I'm sad has really only been used in this one game. But the best thing about Wario Land 4 is how weird it is. Have you been wondering where all the cool ideas are, playing nothing but new Super Mario Bros. The past 10 years like me? All the good ideas Nintendo had are in Wario Land 4. Like, I don't even know where to begin. I guess I can start with the music. It's all really catchy, but also super unique. I mean, there's a song in here with freaking lyrics at the beginning. And while it sounds compressed because it's on the GBA, I can't believe they attempted that at all. And if you think you're gonna listen to those tunes on the soundboard, well, no. Instead, you get to listen to some weird ominous beats with a random guy of Wario making funny faces. There's also a minigame where Wario has to hop over stuff, which includes a seductive cactus for no reason other than to make you raise an eyebrow. Then you got the item shop. It's got a clickable free smiley if you can't afford to buy anything. And all the enemy designs are really funky looking, especially when it comes to the bosses. I mean, there's a boss where you fight a cuckoo clock, then after some attacks, it explodes into a chicken, carrying a chicken, and look at how damn creepy that thing is. And I really love how each level ends too. You basically step on this frog and you're given a timer like you're playing Super Metroid or something. This timer creates a sense of urgency, and since you've just played the level, it's really fun going back through, playing it backwards to clear the stage. There's even a level that's like a board game where you'll roll a dice to make things change in the level. It is insane how creative this game can get. Wario's reactions are still here too, and they're even more expressive and fun to use and look at than ever before. Now, we do have hit points again, but there's still no life system, so it really doesn't matter that much. I don't know what else I need to do to convince you to try Wario Land 4. Of all the Wario Land games, this is the one to start with if you want to get into the series. Before ending, you might be wondering why Mario and Wario isn't on this list. I didn't even know this game existed until very recently, and honestly, it's way more of a Mario game than Wario. He's barely involved at all. I mean, Wario's probably busy heating up some meals with Factor, which is today's sponsor. Factor is a great way to enjoy clean eating without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door that can be ready in 2 minutes. Now, I'm a guy that struggles to find time to cook my own meals, and Factor has helped make my life a lot easier. I mean, I just heat a meal up and boom, got myself a nice tasty meal to chow down on. But maybe you're just looking to cut back on takeout? Get Factor instead. Each meal is prepared by chefs and approved by dietitians, so you know that your Factor meal has all the ingredients you want and nothing you don't. And if you're looking to mix it up, you can add a protein to select vegan plus veggie meals each week. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code BANDY60 to get 60% off your first Factor box. That's Factor75.com or the link below. Remember to use code BANDY60 for your first Factor box.